Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Connor Kinsella, a real estate advisor here in Vancouver with Remax Crest Realty. My focus is primarily on residential real estate in both Vancouver East and West, where I was born and raised and still live to this day. I'm joined today by Eli Zbar, who's founding partner of Arora Zbar LLC. Eli heads up the firm's solicitor practice and both arranges and facilitates a wide array of business, financial, and real estate related transactions. In addition to all of the other avenues of business he conducts, he also represents clients in both strata and residential tenancy disputes. Eli, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Connor. Thanks for the great introduction. I'm really excited to be here today and chat about some residential tenancy or residential real estate.
Awesome. So we'll jump right into it here.
Yeah.
Our topic for today's discussion surrounds what buyers need to be aware of when buying investment property with existing tenants in place. So I have a number of questions here that we're going to work our way through in the next few minutes. We'll start off with this one. Eli, what are some of the main issues that you see and deal with regarding owning real estate occupied by tenants?
That's a great question, Connor. And I think a lot of people have that question in today's market where prices are very high in Vancouver, but there is also the possibility for generating quite a bit of income to help pay off a mortgage or to just have an investment through tenancy. But while tenants can be a great source of income, they can also be a great source of risk. And while it's really easy to figure out how much rent you can charge, it's not quite as easy to figure out what risks you're taking by becoming a landlord or by even making the decision to buy real estate with the potential to become a landlord. So a lot of people don't fully understand their rights and their obligations as a landlord. In BC, the rules are very tilted towards tenants. There are very strong protections for tenants, and strong protections for tenants means onerous obligations for landlords. So if you want to be a landlord, that can be a great idea, but you have to know exactly what you're getting into. You also have to know what the tenant's rights are. You can't just do whatever you want with your tenanted property. There are strict rules about how you can treat tenants, how you can communicate with them, and especially how you can evict them should you want different tenants or should you want to do something else with your property. You should also be sure to know what is in a lease. A lot of people think that if you don't have a written lease in British Columbia, that you can do pretty much whatever you want. But the BC Residential Tenancy Act binds every landlord and tenant to the same basic set of rules, even if you don't have a written lease. If you have rent that's paid and you act as a landlord, you are bound to those terms. It's really important that you understand those terms. And lastly, people have to understand the eviction process and how they can actually get tenants out of their property if you want to say renovate, or if grandma wants to move in, or if you have plans like that, you've got to understand what your off ramp is for your tenants.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Question number 2 here is, what protections does a tenant have when living in a property that has recently sold to a new owner?
So when a property sells, oftentimes the tenant has nothing to do with it, right? The tenant is just living there. And from their point of view and from the law's point of view, unless otherwise agreed upon, all that's changing from the tenant's point of view is the name that they write on their rent check. So if I'm selling my house and I have tenants in the basement, the person who buys that house assumes those tenants unless they otherwise agree. Now, if you're going to get the tenants out of the property, because let's say you are buying a house and there's a basement suite and you want the tenants out of the basement suite, that's something you have to think about when you're making your offer. Because if you are going to make your offer subject to vacant possession or requiring vacant possession of that house, you've got to give at least 2 months notice to the current tenant. So if you have a possession date 4 weeks after your offer, you may not actually get vacant possession, and there's very little that either you or the sellers can do about it. So you have to understand the timelines involved when that protect the tenants, because a tenant, the sale of a house does not automatically entitle someone to end a tenancy, especially if the tenants are relatively new and they are subject to a 1-year lease. So if you're going to want to take over a tenancy and you want to actually live in the unit, or a close family member wants to live in the unit, you have to give tenants 2 months notice. If you want to renovate or do construction on the unit, you have to give them 4 months notice. And then there's also requirements to give them financial compensation in terms of 1 month's rent with either of those conditions. And 2 months notice and 4 months notice, those aren't crazy long timelines. People can often work with that. Closing dates are usually 8 weeks away from offer dates at least. But one thing people don't understand and often don't know, because it's a fairly new law, is the good faith requirement. The good faith requirement is accompanied by a penalty that if you are caught of 12 months rent, where basically if I buy a house and it's got tenants in the basement and I say, my grandma's moving in to the basement, and then 2 weeks later I turn around and I list that basement on Craigslist, the the old tenant, pretty much all they have to do is send a screenshot of that Craigslist ad up to the residential tenancy branch, to the arbitrators, and it's $100 application. And the law says that if you do not do what you said you were going to do in good faith, aka have grandma move in, you are liable to pay a penalty equal to 12 months of rent. So you think in Vancouver, the average one bedroom unit is 2,000, maybe 2,200 bucks a month. So you think if you state the reason for moving out, for moving the tenant out, and you change your mind, you could be on the hook for basically minimum $24,000, assuming that you only have a 1 bedroom suite. I've seen cases where people buy whole homes and it's $4, $5, $6,000 a month in rent, and they say, "Oh, I'm going to live there." They start to move in and they decide they don't want to live there. They want to redevelop. Well, if you're within the first 6 months of buying that place and you just evicted renters, you could be on the hook. I mean, that's $50,000. So when you're making an investment into property, you have to think about, do you have plans in place that you can live with for at least 6 months after buying the property and evicting the tenants, so that you don't get tagged with a 12-month rent penalty.
Okay, perfect. Question number 3. If you are the new owner of a property with an existing tenant in it, what protections do you have as the new owner?
So the biggest protection you have, and it seems kind of obvious to say, is that they have to pay you rent. There is the 2 month and the 4 month notice periods I was talking about before are for getting rid of tenants that are otherwise okay. They pay rent on time, they take care of their place, they allow you to do inspections, things like that. If somebody doesn't pay rent, you have the right to serve them a notice for a 10-day notice of eviction. If they're doing something to harm your property, let's say they're running a meth lab in your basement, or they're always noisy, or they're doing something, they're damaging the property, they're not using it, or they're doing something to endanger your safety as the landlord, you can give them a 1 month notice. Those are strong protections, because if somebody misses one rent check, you technically have the right to make the eviction application, although I wouldn't suggest doing it after one missed rent check, because if you get to the arbitration and they offer to pay rent, you've wasted all of your time. But that is your best protection, is the obligation to pay rent. The second best is the tenant's obligation to keep your rental property in good repair. Now, this is a bit of a protection on both sides. The tenant has the obligation to maintain reasonable cleanliness and safety standards, and so does the landlord. So that means you, as the landlord, and you would want to do this with your investment property, the landlord has to keep the lights on, the water running, the electrical outlets working, things like that. If there's any pest infestations, the landlord deals with that. But the tenant also has to do their fair share and keep up their end of the bargain by not leaving garbage out, by not letting water run, by turning off the lights, and by conserving electricity and things like that. These are the tenant's obligations. And as I said before, these are not something that the tenant has to agree to in writing. If you have tenants and they pay you rent, they are bound to these laws, and so are you. And one sort of tidbit of information that a lot of landlords don't know is that you are entitled every month to do an inspection of the unit or of the home if it's a whole home. This right is a little bit different now during COVID because of the social distancing rules, and there's more leeway for a tenant to not have to let you in to inspect. But often the best thing you can do when you suspect a tenant is maybe illegally subletting your property, or they're doing something illegal in the property or damaging it, you can serve them a notice at least 24 hours in advance by posting it on their door or sending it to them in the mail, or there's a number of different ways. And they have to let you into the property to look around. And when you're looking around, I mean, it is your property. You have to be careful about taking photos and taking videos, but you are allowed to do that within reason, as long as you're not, being ridiculous about it, getting up in their face. You are allowed to take pictures, especially if it's for the purpose of gathering evidence for an eviction. And that not only puts your tenants on notice that you are paying attention, it also gives you a chance to create a dialogue with your tenants and get them to show you around the place if there's any problems or if they have any complaints. And then, of course, it lets you see how your tenants live, how your tenants keep the place in a state of repair, and whether you want this relationship to continue long term or not.
Awesome. That was very informative. Thanks for that. One last question to finish up with here, Eli. What tips do you have, based on working with your existing client base, what tips do you have for anyone that is looking to purchase a property as an investment with tenants already living in the home?
Sure. So if you don't have experience as a landlord, I would suggest looking for proper, but you want to be a landlord, I should say. I would suggest looking for properties that are up for sale that already have long-term tenants. Tenants where the tenant is happy and the landlord is happy, and the only reason for the sale is maybe the landlord is retiring or downsizing or something like that. You certainly don't want to take over a tenancy relationship that is acrimonious or where the landlords had problems. I've seen deals come across my desk that were motivated entirely by bad tenants. And I pity the buyers in those situations because they're signing up for a headache and they're signing up for a pretty significant expense. So the first thing is, if you are buying a place with existing tenants, get to know the tenants, do your due diligence about the tenants, talk to the landlord. If you can, check references. If you can see if the landlord has their original application, take a look at that and figure out if this is a basement suite, they're essentially your roommates. If you've got kids, if you've got your family living there, think about, are those the types of people that you want sharing your home with you? The next thing is, and I can't say this enough, understand your rights and your obligations as a landlord, and understand the rights and the obligations your tenant will have. The BC government has excellent plain English resources. I'm happy to drop those in some of the comments. I'm happy to always answer those questions in direct messaging on LinkedIn or whatever. You can shoot me an email with those questions. There are really, really good resources. There's form letters, there's negotiation strategies, there's problem solving websites that really help you understand what can happen when things are going right and what can happen when things are going wrong. And then the last tip I have for if you're going to be a landlord, and I mean, this applies to just about any situation in your life, even outside of being a landlord, is keep it in writing. I can't tell you how many times I've been in front of the arbitrator at the RTB, and I said, this is the state of the affairs between the landlord and the tenant. They have nothing in writing. They talk to each other on the back steps when they're taking out the garbage. And then it's just a game of he said, she said, and it really complicates things and it really makes things much more expensive because I have to find ways of proving that those facts exist. So if you have a conversation with your tenant, follow it up in writing. If you have a problem with your tenant, notify them in writing. Take pictures of things, keep records, take screenshots of text messages. If you don't keep if you delete your text messages off your phone, when in doubt, keep it in writing. If you have noise problems, like let's say you're in a split level duplex and your tenants are upstairs and they're, playing basketball at 2 in the morning, record the audio with your phone, keep a journal, keep informal notes on your bedside table, do whatever you can to not have to rely on your memory. And I think that is the single best risk management tip I can give anyone when they're doing any sort of business, but especially in landlord tenancy. The more evidence you have that tenants are causing a problem, the easier it will be to get them out and restore peace to your home.
Awesome. Eli, thanks again for taking time today to elaborate on the topic. I know that there are a number of people out there that have been in the position of buying property that have existing tenants, and it's extremely valuable to touch on the differences in buying property that is vacant versus tenanted. I know you're a busy man, but I do appreciate you taking the time, and I hope you'll join us again on other real estate related topics.
Thanks, Connor. It was really great chatting with you. Some great questions today. And if anyone's watching this video wondering about if being a landlord is right for them, you can find me on LinkedIn, Eli Zbar, or at AroraZbar.com. That's AroraZbar.com. Thanks, Connor.
Awesome. And if anybody has any real estate related questions, you can reach me at www.connorkinsella.com and give me a follow on social media at Connor Kinsella Real Estate. Thanks again, Eli, and have a great day.
You too.